autopsy, that there were readable X-rays. The autopsy doctor said that there were no X-rays. The X-ray machine was broken. It proves that it shows and demonstrates the harassment. It shows that the car was not there, and all of this again is proved by the Federal Investigative Records, the own records. And when we filed that thing, that was in 1997. We hadn't really gotten too far into the case, and we proved all of that even after even early on, before we had gone through the Starr report and done a very lengthy analysis, again using all federal investigative records.
Okay, well, let me ask you some questions. Not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but now, in your 11-page letter, what did you cite as proof or evidence that it wasn't the correct gun?
Well, let me first refer your listeners to our website, that is there.
Right.
It's FBICoverup.com. But let me, for example, the gun, the ownership of the weapon. The government says that he owned this weapon, and the FBI 302 said that they showed the weapon to the wife, to Lisa Foster, and she identified the silver gun as one that her father, her husband, had owned. He identified the silver gun as the one that he had owned. Well, unfortunately, the gun that was found in Vincent Foster's hand and photographed and released to NBC News, it was on the nightly news, is black. They showed Mrs. Foster the wrong gun, and to trick her into identifying it as one that he owned. That's number one. Number two, the autopsy, or excuse me, the car. We showed that through the forensic evidence, by the digestion of the meat and potatoes that was in his stomach from the autopsy, that he was dead for 4 to 6 hours by the time, that he ate in 4 to 6 hours. We know when he ate. We know he had lunch around 1 o'clock. So he was dead by the time that Patrick was in the park. He was deceased at that time, but his car wasn't there. So that's another one. Another one is that in the weapon, one of the paramedics said that he was 100% sure there was a semi-automatic in his hand, the same type that the park police carry, by the way. He swore, and he drew a picture of it. He said it was 100% certain. Well, it was the gun that was that's the official death weapon was a revolver, a 1913 revolver. That was which was untraceable because of the serial. They weren't tracing them, and they weren't registering the serial numbers. Untraceable. It had no fingerprints on it, even though it was 90-some degree weather in July in Washington. It kind of goes on and on and on. So what? Let's talk a little bit about the evidence. Which aspect? Do you want to talk about the autopsy, the gun, the gunpowder, the bullets? We covered the car, I think.
What did you use to prove the harassment?
We had a map of the neighborhood where he was harassed with little numbers on the harassment, little numbers where these people were, where they were first cited, and there were 25 men, 25 little numbers on this on the harassment part of it. Incidentally, we also had Patrick take a lie detector test from Paul Miner, who's was the chief polygraph examiner for the FBI for 10 years. Of course, Patrick passed, and it sounds like he's a nut. So we sent him to a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. I gave him a battery of tests. He passed. The psychiatrist sent him for more testing from a psychologist. To test his memory, because it seems a little strange that here you got a guy who can remember all of these details. He tested in the 90th percentile for visual memory. So I think we kind of nailed it that he's telling the truth.
There was something else too about they said that the X-ray machine was broken. They couldn't take an X-ray. Is that?
Okay. The autopsy is really very telling. But just much more than just the X-rays. But the the autopsy doctor said that the X-ray machine was broken, and so he had taken the X-ray. I mean, that's one story that he gave. So Reed Irvine of Accuracy in Media called, made some telephone calls, and talked to this guy Jesse Poore, who serviced that X-ray machine. This is Dr. Beyer, who's the autopsy doctor, since passed away. He said that they couldn't get it. He couldn't get any readable X-rays because they were too dark. The X-rays came out too dark. So in any event, Reed Irvine talked to Jesse Poore, and we have Reed Irvine's affidavit, which we submitted with the Star Report. It's attached to the Star Report by court order, saying that that there was again. This was in July 20th. The autopsy was the following day, the 21st. There was no service call made for that autopsy machine until October, and not because they were too dark, like a buyer said. They were too light. They needed an adjustment. They were too light. So, that's a lot. I mean, the autopsy, the machine was in fact working. There were autopsy X-rays taken, and they were readable. But he said that they didn't take them. So, in any event, also the autopsy. I think the most telling part of about the autopsy is that the Star Report comes out and tells us, the autopsy occurred in front of all of the Park Police investigators, and that incidentally is a requirement of both the Northern Virginia Medical Examiner's Office, who performed the autopsy, and the U.S. Park Police, who allegedly had in the investigation. Well, that's what the Star Report tells us, but that's not true. The autopsy was over by the time the police got there. The police weren't there. By the time the police got there, they had removed his palate, his mouth. They had taken out his brain, which would have been very telling. That's why the X-rays had to visit. It was over by the time the police got there. And we know that from the U.S. Park Police report that said by the time we got there, he had already removed the soft palate and the brain, and it was over by the time the police got there. But you wouldn't know that from reading Ken Starr's report.
But back to
what else about the autopsy? Another thing about the autopsy was the autopsy initially was scheduled to take place 2 days after the body was found, and then but it was moved up to just hours after the body was found until the following morning. And then we go through the record and we find out there was some issue about why was the autopsy moved up, and what we found going through the records, we went through 20,000 pages of records. 3 different people took responsibility for moving the autopsy up. 2 Park Police people and 1 White House person. No, not 1 White House person. 2 Park Police investigators, upper echelon people, and the U.S. Park Police, and then Dr. Beyer himself. They all took responsibility for moving the autopsy up. Well, I think one of the reasons they did move the autopsy up was so that the investigating police officers couldn't be there because they worked all night.
Gotcha.
It was an evening shift. And one of the U.S. Park Police investigators said he got a call and asked him if he wanted to go. The autopsy had been moved up it was found on a Tuesday to it was supposed to be Thursday afternoon. It was Wednesday morning when the autopsy was performed. And he'd been up all night. He said, no, I'm not, no. So So it's in any event. So that's the autopsy.
Let me ask you a question about the gun. Back to the gun for 1 second. Was there ever any ballistics test done on the bullet in the body to compare it to the antique revolver that he had?
Well, incidentally, the U.S. Park Police closed. Their investigation was open for 17 days. They closed the investigation, ruled it as suicide before they even tested, before they got the results, or before the gun was even test fired. Really? They didn't know if it could fire. They said, "Oh yeah, this is the gun," and as far as the bullet was concerned, well, the bullet was a high velocity bullet, which would have blown his head off. I mean, it would have blown the back of the top of his head off. According to the Dr. Beyer, there was an inch and a quarter, about the size of a $50 exit wound. Then they searched the park. There were two separate searches by the FBI. Searched the park. They couldn't find the bullet. Extensive searches. They couldn't find it, of course, because it was still in his head. There was no exit wound. We have the testimony of the U.S. Park Police officer John Rolla, who said he gloved up and felt the top of the back of the head, and he said there was a mushy spot back there, and he concluded that the bullet did not exit the head, but it fractured the top of the back of the head, but didn't exit. And of course, he was right. That's exactly what happened. But the bullet was still there. That's why the X-rays had to disappear. That's why he took out the brain. He took out the brain before the police officers got there, and then he put it on like this kind of a meat slicer and sliced it up into little tiny pieces, saying he was looking for bullet fragments. Well, he destroyed the evidence. The sort of hallmark of this suicide conclusion is the finding of gunpowder on the soft palate. That is, that's the top of the back of the mouth, and allegedly that's where he placed the weapon into his mouth and pulled the trigger. Well, that's really the cornerstone. I mean, expert after expert after expert has relied on that finding to conclude suicide in the park. And Dr. Beyer said that the gunpowder was grossly present. That means you could see it with the naked eye. And he had slides. He made slides of the soft palate and sent it to the Northern Virginia laboratory to have it analyzed. Well, the Northern Virginia laboratory couldn't find any. There was nothing there. There was nothing. The only reason we know that they couldn't find that was because we found an FBI lab report that excused the absence of this gunpowder on the slides. It said it was not preserved in such a way so as to be conducive to retaining gunpowder particles. So it's gone. So the point is, there was no entrance wound in the mouth. There was an entrance wound in the neck. All the paramedics, the paramedics saw it when they arrived they saw the bullet wound in the neck. Miguel Rodriguez talked about the bullet wound in the neck. He said he had a photograph that was just a joke, that he had it enhanced, and he could see there was a bullet wound in the neck. Also, let's talk a little bit about the gunpowder. The gunpowder that was found on Miss Foster was ball powder. Now, ball powder is used and the ammunition was manufactured by Remington. Well, Remington has never used ball powder, so ball powder is used for when people pack their own. Pack their own bullets. Right, when they reload. Load their own bullets. That's what you use ball powder. Right. But, so... was there any evidence that Foster had ever made his own bullets? Because that's an elaborate process. I've seen it done. No, absolutely not. Of course not. No, he's not. He wasn't a gun enthusiast. He had one weapon. It was a silver revolver. And there are other family members that said that it was that. And there was one nephew who was most familiar. He was kind of a gun guy, and